History has a convenient way of burying the uncomfortable, often hiding the most profound truths inside the darkest of vessels. In the dusty archives of colonial West Africa, specifically within the lore of the Efik people of Calabar, there existed a seed that determined fate itself. It was the Physostigma venenosum, better known to the trembling hands that held it as the Calabar Bean. For centuries, this was not a botanical curiosity. It was a judge, jury, and executioner. It was the ordeal poison. The logic of the ritual was brutal in its simplicity. If you were accused of witchcraft, you swallowed the bean. If your body convulsed and you died, the spirits had confirmed your guilt. If your body violently rejected the poison, if you vomited and lived, you were innocent. It was a game of Russian roulette played with biochemistry, a lethal toss of the dice that claimed thousands of lives in the dense forests of Nigeria. To the European explorers and early colonial botanists, this was savagery, a macabre footnote in their travel journals. But to a young chemist named Percy Julian, it was something entirely different. Where history saw a tool of superstition, Julian saw a complex molecular riddle waiting to be solved. He believed that locked inside this deadly legume was not just a neurotoxin capable of stopping the heart, but a precise chemical key that could unlock one of the most terrifying afflictions of the human eye, glaucoma. Glaucoma is a thief that works in silence, building pressure within the eye until the optic nerve is crushed, stealing sight irrevocably. Julian knew that the active agent in the bean, physostigmine, constricted the pupil and dropped that pressure. It could save millions from darkness. But the world was not ready to listen to Percy Julian. It wasn't just that the chemistry was daunting. Physostigmine is an alkaloid of fiendish complexity, a labyrinth of atoms that had baffled the greatest minds of the early 20th century. The real barrier was far more rigid than any chemical bond. It was the color of his skin. Born in Alabama, the grandson of enslaved people, Julian had clawed his way to the summit of academia, only to find the doors bolted shut. Despite graduating as valedictorian from DePauw University and earning a PhD from the University of Vienna, American academia refused to grant him a professorship. "We don't hire your kind," was the silent and often spoken rule of the day. So, while his peers were given state-of-the-art university laboratories and armies of graduate students, Julian was forced into the margins. He found himself working in corporate labs, fighting for scraps of recognition. The scientific establishment looked down from their ivory towers and sneered. They claimed the molecule was too unstable, too intricate to ever be synthesized artificially in a lab. To them, the Calabar bean was a chaotic product of nature, impossible to tame. Julian was attempting the impossible, driven by a quiet, burning fury. He wasn't just trying to cure blindness, he was trying to force a blind society to see him. He was a man standing on the precipice of a discovery that would change medicine forever, yet he was treated as a second-class citizen in the very country that would eventually owe its sight. The archives of his life from this period are filled with rejection letters, each one a testament to the suffocating weight of prejudice he had to bench press every single day just to get to his test tubes.
The year was 1934, and the battlefield was not a trench, but the pages of the Journal of the American Chemical Society. In the world of organic chemistry, synthesis is the ultimate proof of mastery. To synthesize a molecule is to understand it so completely that you can build it from scratch, atom by atom. And the Mount Everest of the time was physostigmine. The scientific community believed the summit had already been reached, or at least the map had been drawn. Sir Robert Robinson, the titan of British science, a man who would go on to win the Nobel Prize, had published his findings on the structure of the physostigmine molecule. Robinson was the establishment personified, powerful, brilliant, and unquestioned. When Sir Robert Robinson spoke, the scientific world took notes. But Percy Julian, working late nights in a modest lab at DePaul University, a position he held by the skin of his teeth on a temporary fellowship, looked at Robinson's papers and saw something no one else dared to see. He saw a mistake. It was a subtle error in the proposed chemical structure, a misinterpretation of how the atoms bonded. To challenge a figure like Robinson was professional suicide. For a black scientist in 1930s America, it was practically an act of insanity. If Julian was wrong, his career wouldn't just be damaged, it would be obliterated. He would be dismissed as an arrogant upstart who didn't know his place. The whispers in the faculty lounges were already poisonous. Yet Julian possessed a courage that transcended chemistry. In a move of breathtaking boldness, he published a paper declaring, "This is wrong." He didn't just suggest an alternative, he staked his entire reputation on it. He announced that he would synthesize physostigmine his way, proving his structure was the correct one. The race was on. It was David versus Goliath, played out with beakers and Bunsen burners. For months, Julian and his colleague Joseph Pekel worked in a fever state. The synthesis required 11 distinct chemical steps. One wrong move, one impure reagent, and the entire chain would collapse. The pressure was immense. Julian wrote to his friends about the sleepless nights, the terror of failure haunting him at the microscope. Then came the breakthrough. As the final reaction cooled, crystals began to form. They were not the chaotic sludge of failure. They were the precise geometric proof of victory. The melting point matched perfectly. Julian had done it. He had synthesized the active ingredient of the Calabar bean. He had proven a Nobel laureate wrong, and in doing so, he cracked the code for mass-producing the drug. No longer would the world have to rely on harvesting erratic beans from the African rainforest. The medicine could be made in a lab, reliable and abundant. Overnight, the price of the drug plummeted. Julian hadn't just solved a puzzle, he had democratized sight. He had handed a miracle cure to the masses, wrenching it from the grip of scarcity. The scientific community was forced to bow their heads. The impossible had been achieved by the man they had tried to lock out. But as Julian would soon learn, conquering the laws of nature was easier than changing the laws of human hatred.
By 1950, Dr. Percy Julian was a verified titan of industry. He was no longer just the man who synthesized physostigmine. He was the spunky chemist who had found a way to synthesize cortisone from soybeans, bringing relief to millions of arthritis sufferers. He was wealthy, celebrated in scientific journals, and heralded as a genius. He had achieved the American dream in its purest form, success through sheer intellect and hard work. Naturally, he sought a home that reflected his station. He purchased a spacious, beautiful house in Oak Park, Illinois, a suburb famous for being the hometown of Ernest Hemingway and for its manicured lawns and quiet streets. It was supposed to be a sanctuary for him, his wife Anna, and their 2 children. But to his new neighbors, Percy Julian was not a genius or a savior of sight. He was simply a black man who had forgotten his place. The welcome wagon for the Julian family did not bring casseroles or flowers. It brought fire. On Thanksgiving Day, 1950, before the family had even finished unpacking their boxes, the silence of the holiday was shattered. A firebomb was hurled through the window of their new home. It exploded inside, gutting the interior and sending a terrifying message: "You are not welcome here." The flames that licked the walls of his house were fueled by the same ancient hatred that had denied him professorships decades earlier. Julian, however, was a man forged in the fires of adversity. He refused to leave. He hired guards. He walked the perimeter of his property, his head held high.
But the terror didn't stop. Less than a year later, another attack came. This time, dynamite was thrown at the house while his children were inside. The explosion rocked the neighborhood, a violent attempt to murder a family simply for existing in a white space. The image from that night is searing. Dr. Percy Julian, the man who had given vision to the world, sitting on his front porch with a shotgun across his lap, guarding his family against the darkness of human ignorance. It is a bitter, gut-wrenching irony. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to healing, to using the highest powers of the human mind to alleviate suffering. He had saved the vision of countless strangers, perhaps even some of the very people who now sought to burn him out of his home. Yet, in the eyes of his neighbors, his brilliance meant nothing compared to his race. History textbooks often sanitize this part of the story, or they relegate Julian to a brief footnote about soybeans. They fail to mention the dynamite. They fail to capture the warrior spirit of a man who fought two simultaneous wars, one against the stubborn complexities of organic molecules, and another against the violent systemic racism of his era. Percy Julian died in 1975, a holder of over 130 patents and a member of the National Academy of Sciences. But his true legacy isn't just in the chemical formulas he balanced. It is in that image on the porch. It is in the defiance of a genius who refused to be intimidated by terror. We restore his name today, not just because he was a great scientist, but because he was a giant of human dignity who forced the world to look him in the eye, even as it tried to look away.